It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Walter Kitundu. Walter is a Tanzanian-American multidisciplinary artist and educator, and the director of Kitundu Studio, which focuses on the development and installation of public artworks. He creates sculpture, sound installations, and large-scale public artworks that address place, history, nature, and community, and he received a prestigious MacArthur Fellowship in 2008. He also builds extraordinary musical instruments and mechanical devices when he isn't obsessively documenting the natural world as a bird photographer. If you're on Instagram, I do highly recommend following his account at Bird Turntable. So Walter, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So nice to have you all here. I see some familiar faces when I quickly scroll through who's here. It's really nice to be here to talk about birds and art, two of my favorite things. And yeah, it's a blessing to be able to spend time with them, and it's often a solitary endeavor. So it's really nice to be able to share these moments with people and talk about them. And I know that everybody has a bird story. So I'm thankful that you're invited me here to tell some of my bird stories today. I'm somebody who's really developed my interest in birds on the West Coast, and in the Bay Area in particular. So I really feel at home along the Pacific Flyway, and I'm really glad to be invited to share some of my work and some of my approach to being with the birds. I'm going to talk about my artwork, but I thought we could ground ourselves, or I think since we're talking about birds, we could elevate ourselves and start with some nice bird encounters just to sort of get into the spirit of things. What you're looking at now is a piece that I made a few years back of a great blue heron, and I made a kinetic bird that as you approached it, it would actually respond in sort of this mode where as it landed as you came up toward the bird. So I'll talk about my artwork, but for now let's just go through and look at a few images of birds. I'll start maybe with my bird photography story. This is at Crissy Field. In 2004, I borrowed a friend's camera for a residency that I had in Iceland that I'll mention later. And I still had the camera with me when I came back and started to take pictures. And in those first like 6 months of bird photography, a lot of the pictures were of birds flying away from me. And I noticed in time, as I learned more about them, you can actually see the images begin to change, and more birds are either like undisturbed or flying toward me. This is a really early photo. It was taken with a 3.2 megapixel point and shoot camera. So the gear is helpful. I've got a really nice camera now, but I think the critical thing is to just be present and to learn what to look for. Think about where to place yourself, what the light is doing, what the wind is doing, and the birds can teach you all of that. So I'm not really a great birder, but I'm a great bird watcher. I'm really interested in behavior, learning how the birds will sort of telegraph their intentions through certain movements. So I may not be able to immediately ID one of the like cryptic fall warblers, or assess primary projection and bill shape to narrow down an ID, but I'm really adept at like reading the room, so to speak, and seeing what's unfolding in an environment and getting a sense of how that shapes behavior. And if I don't see a specific species when I'm out birding, that's cool. Like I see what I see when I'm out there, and I feel like that's enough of a gift for me. So I'm just going to share a few other pictures, mostly from the Bay Area. This was in the Arboretum in Golden Gate Park. Female Cooper's hawk who was started playing with her two siblings, and ended up in this sort of grove of trees. And when I went into the grove of trees and looked up, she was there and signaling to her two brothers that playtime was over. So it was really amazing to see this sort of display of the muscular control that she had over the feathers on her body as she was mantling. This is another really special moment. I went down to Big Sur to see if I could see condors, because I'd never seen California condors before, and happened to arrive on a day where they were flying at eye level just off of one of the roads, taking advantage of the updrafts off of the ocean. So it turned out to be a beautiful sunny day, and these enormous birds were flying like 15, 20 feet away, 30 feet away, just at eye level, back and forth across with the ocean as a backdrop. So it really, you just never know what you're going to see until you get out there. And as a bird photographer too, and I think just as an artist or a person in general, I think it's really important to embrace and understand when to like sort of count your blessings and take your happy accidents. Like in this photo, I was following this great blue heron into the darkness. As I followed, I have this thing called light denial, where I just think there's always enough light. I'm just going to stay out, and it gets darker and darker. And then pretty soon it was so dark I could barely see the bird, and I just turned on my flash. I was really new to photography, and I didn't really know what those settings would do. And when the heron took off, I sort of just panned and took one photo. And when I looked into the camera, this is what was there. And I really feel like the heron took this photograph, not me. Like they waited for the right amount, the timing. And when I saw the photograph, it was a happy accident, but it kind of showed me what was possible, with certain exposures and with a little bit of luck and timing. And then I was able to study this photograph and think about, okay, well, if I wanted to replicate this, how might I do it in the future? So happy accidents are a big part of bird photography, and in particularly. This is a red-tailed hawk at near the Cliff House. I really like this intersection of birds with the built environment. Here's another example of that, a Cooper's hawk. I think this is on Baker Street in San Francisco. So a lot of these are urban birds. This is a barn owl taken from below at the Palace of Fine Arts. A friend of mine and I were among the first, I think, to recognize that barn owls were actually nesting in the city again after, I think, a gap of about 100 years. I think now they've been located in other places as well, but they were in the top of the Palace of Fine Arts in those nooks and crannies, and we were able to see a lot of owl sign and then finally find the birds up there. So a really lovely discovery, particularly since I was an artist in residence at the Exploratorium when it was located there. This is a martial eagle photographed in East Africa, where I grew up in Tanzania. So I had the good fortune to go home and visit family, and also go on a safari to the Serengeti. And I couldn't have asked for a moment better than to be able to photograph this particular raptor. And then the brown pelican, which is, oftentimes sort of gangly and somewhat clumsy looking, but once they're in the air, they just are so masterful. And I just love this moment of grace. And I'm really interested in photographing birds doing birdie things. I think there's a lot of images of birds sitting still in the world, and many of them are really exquisite. But I'm personally super fascinated by the idea of what makes birds birds, and behavior in particular. And just as I say this, here's a picture of a bird sitting still, a burrowing owl in like a classic burrowing owl stance. And this is near a golf course near the South Bay. So now I live currently I live in Seattle until June, but I'm only here for a year with my family. But we live in Illinois. And so I've had to sort of get to know a different flyway and a different part of the country, which has been humbling because they have a lot of different kind of birds there. But they have Cooper's hawks, which so I felt at home. This is an example of, this was in LaBagh Woods in the city. And apparently this adult male who's mating with the female while she's having her meal was an interloper. And the female had apparently paired with a juvenile male who was absent at the time. So I think she was just maximizing her sort of chances at reproductive success in this moment. And with the middle of the country, the Midwest and the East, you get these pretty phenomenal spring migrations. So April and May in Chicago can be pretty amazing. And for me, it was like lifer after lifer, going out and seeing all these birds I'd only seen in guides before. So this is a magnolia warbler foraging in the trees above the Chicago River. And this is a mourning warbler, which I was told was a very skulky bird and hard to take photographs of. So this was another example of just sheer luck. I happened to be at Montrose, and this bird popped up on a branch in front of me, and I took the photo. And it was only after that, and trying to take more pictures of mourning warblers, that I realized it's not a very easy thing to do. And here's a chestnut-sided warbler as well during one of those wonderful spring migrations. And bank swallows are also there at Montrose, and I love spending a lot of time with them. And this is like probably one of maybe, pardon me, one of maybe 12 images out of several hundred that actually turned out, because they're so difficult to photograph. But I love photographing swallows, because if you spend an hour or two with them, then every other bird feels sort of easy to try to get a photograph of. So I really enjoyed taking pictures of them. And also at Montrose, I got my first look at a long-tailed duck that came by, and you have to sort of count your blessings. I went out there, I had about a half an hour to stop and see if I could find the bird, and happened to find the bird out by the pier. And not only was it present, but it was active, and then actually flew around a little bit. So I was able to get some flight shots. And for me, the camera is a tool for seeing. It really allows me to sort of settle into the fine details that I can't necessarily pick up when I'm there in the moment. And it makes me remember particular shapes. And this comes in handy later when I'm making my work, in that I've trained myself now to remember these sort of artful shapes that the birds can make when they're flying or landing or engaged in these other postures. And I think it's definitely had an impact in the sort of aesthetics that I bring to my other work. And this is my plea to everybody to just pay attention to and love and respect the common birds in your area too. This is a female red-winged blackbird, and they're just spectacular. And I think there's a lot of beauty and a lot of drama, and there's so much to learn from all of the birds. And I think there's something really special about getting to know the birds around you to the point where they feel like friends. And then if anybody else shows up, you have a really clear sense of something different occurring, but still have the same sort of respect and appreciation for them. So I'll talk a little bit about my artwork now. And you might be wondering, how do we go from birds to turntables, or the other way around? I started with turntables and ended up as a bird photographer. So I owe a lot to my parents, my mother in particular, who sort of shaped my understanding of myself as an artist since I was young. And I really think if you are an artist or choose to be an artist, then it's really a matter of giving yourself permission to think in those ways, to move in those ways. And I think folks who don't feel like they have connection to like artistic expression, it's a hard thing to give yourself permission to do. And I was fortunate that I did that early, and developed just a background in trying things. I don't have a background in electronics or in instrument building or woodworking, but I do have a background in trying things. And I was fortunate that what I did do, I had some like good results, and it resonated with people, and it gave me the chance to do more work. So when it came to the turntable, I was given a chance to learn how to play this instrument. And so I DJ'd for a while, then I was in a live band, and I'd play solo instruments and sound effects on the record and really make it feel like I was just another instrument or another voice on the stage. But playing with musicians really made me want to act like hit something or pluck something and get a sound. So I hit the turntable, and I hit it with chopsticks. And when I turned it up loud enough, it amplified those sounds and sounded like a drum. Here's a picture of like early days when I figured out how to do that. In this case, I put a tin can on the stylus of the turntable, and when I hit it with the chopstick, it wasn't just a thud, a percussive thud that went through. It was the tone of the can itself. And that was my moment when I realized that you could actually amplify notes and other melodic material through the turntable in this way. So then I began to imagine what it might be like to use the turntable to build stringed instruments. And so I built some smaller stringed instruments that interacted with the record player. And then I ended up building a turntable and just incorporating the strings into the body of the turntable. And people have really tried to shield turntables from vibration since they were invented because they're so sensitive to it. It's seen as a problem with the turntable. But in my case, it's the key characteristic which makes the instrument that I ended up building possible. The first phonoharp I built was in 2001. And these early instruments, they really demystified building things for me. It allowed me to really go through that transition from imagining something to having a bunch of raw materials, and then just with a little bit of time and energy, I would end up with something that I considered a precious object. And I think there's something in that transformation that is still central to why I'm an artist today and what it is, what moves me to make things. Building these things really taught me that the distance between imagination and reality was navigable. It just takes a little time and energy to go from an idea to now you have a thing that you have to reckon with. And I think the hard work is just in starting. The rest is just moving things around. It's just time and energy and reflection. But you have to sort of get over that initial resistance. And once you begin, the process takes you along. The scholar Hubert Diassi talks about having a conversation with your materials, and that it's critical to learning, to developing a vocabulary. And I think you need to listen to your materials to understand what forms they like to take. And it's a conversation, sometimes it's a negotiation, but it's also how I learn about nature. I pay really close attention, ask good questions, listen for the answers, and then just keep the dialogue going. I think both approaches require a bit of patience, but in time you get to know your materials, and you even get to know the birds in a more familiar way. And eventually both the materials and the birds end up feeling like old friends. So I started building lots of instruments, like one every 3 months for several years. I just have an idea pop up and I'd have to bring it into the world. This is one, another phonoharp, as I called them. This is inspired by a West African warrior harp, an instrument called a kora. I'd have an inkling about a new instrument. I just have to build it, and I would build it, and then I'd have to learn how to play it. And so these bird forms would start to creep in and enter into the designs that you can see some on the side of this instrument. And at that point, I'd written a letter to this place in Iceland asking for a residency, and then it was a long shot and just forgotten about it. And then I got a letter in the mail saying that the board had met and decided when my residency window was and that I was going to Iceland. So I was thrilled, totally broke, but really thrilled. And I was able to like scrounge up the money to get a plane ticket to get there. And a friend of mine let me borrow their camera. And so I had a camera when I was in Iceland, and I would take pictures of doorknobs and fence posts and things that were interesting to me. This is the place here. It's Skriðuklaustur. It's in eastern Iceland, in a glacial river valley. Beautiful, beautiful place, just away from any sort of big metropolis or city. Dark skies, beautiful stars, northern lights, and lots of sheep. So I got to spend time in this lovely place and think about my work. And when I got back from Iceland, I still had this loaner camera. And so I was at the Exploratorium, and I was really interested in the bathing gulls. And so I started to take pictures of the gulls to see if I could see their wing shapes as they were taking their baths. And then they'd fly up from the water and shake themselves off like a dog, in this twisting motion, which is pictured here. And so I started photographing the gulls and getting really fascinated with them. And then a great blue heron would walk by, and I'd take a picture of the heron. And then a hummingbird would come in, and I'd photograph the hummingbird, and a hawk would fly by. And just at this point, my friend Nicole Miner gave me a book on birds of Northern California, and it all kind of snowballed at that point. And I started to really think about and follow and take pictures of the birds more seriously. It used to take like maybe 20 minutes for me to walk to work at the Exploratorium. But if the birds were good, it could take me 3 hours to get there. So it was nice that I was there on a residency and my timing was flexible, but the birds had a lot to do with when I showed up or not. So it turns out I was getting to know my materials and the birds at the same time. And so these visual vocabularies began to cross-pollinate and to influence one another. You can see that in the inset there of bridge of this particular instrument, which is a string bowed turntable that I built inspired by an Indian instrument called the sarangi. So these were kind of ecological and artistic conversations. These were my education. They were my way of deepening my understanding with the world. And my art practice is really informed by the kind of adaptive reuse that's found all over the world in places where resources are scarce. I was a kid in San Francisco that I was broke, and I was sort of scrounging and going to flea markets for all of my things. But this adaptive reuse that's found in places, where resources are scarce, you can draw a pretty straight line from that scarcity to the perils of colonialism and imperialism and the harms that establish those inequities. But there's a level of artistry and improvisation and material intelligence that's found in such places that is without equal, and it's deeply inspiring. I just wish that people were never forced into scenarios where a kind of sculptural improvisation becomes a mechanism for their survival. So I kept building, and I kept getting ideas and building those and getting ideas and building those. And this was one of I had a turntable that was my prized possession that I cut up and built into this instrument. And as a result, I was able to travel and perform with it internationally. So I was really, really fortunate that sort of risk taking, that perceived risk, turned out to be worthwhile. And then so over the years, I've built many of these instruments, and the result of all those conversations with wood and string and electronics ended up in this instrument that I built a few years ago, which is, I think, one of the last phonoharps that I built. Here's a sample of what it sounds like. So the thing about records is they have grooves, and if you magnify those grooves, you've got these mountain ranges, these valleys. It's a physical object. You drive it with movement to create physical vibrations that move through the air and then vibrate your eardrum. It's this physical mechanical system, and I was like obsessed with it. So it led me to take notice of other systems, including those in the natural world around me. I was always thinking about, what if I put a record on that? Or what if I made a record player out of like all natural materials, and it was attached to a tree, and as the tree blew in the wind, it would ratchet and play the record, and then it would all fall apart and end up back in nature. So I was thinking a lot about how natural systems could connect with turntables, and the natural world is really complicated. It has a deep rhythm, but it has these established patterns. but it's always unpredictable at the same time. My friend Carrie Thomas would call it ever-changingly fresh, like a waterfall or a fire. It's steady, but it's never the same. And I think about like black phoebes who return to the same perch every day, but they're always open to the demands of the moment. So each bird, they have their rhythms that are shaped by their environment, but they can step out of those rhythms in a millisecond, whether it's to grab prey or to evade a predator. They have established rhythms, really practiced rhythms, but it's not restrictive. And as a musical improviser, I think improvisers of any stripe would understand this and aspire to move in similar ways. So I've learned a lot from birds, and they teach you so much about the landscape. They teach you about the weather, about light, about other birds. I always say that birds are the best bird watchers because they have to be in order to survive. So if you spend time with a particular bird, they tend to show you everything about the place that they're in and their setting that's important to them. So it was really natural that my sculptural work would be informed by all that time outdoors in the elements with the birds. So I think about natural systems all the time. I realize there are exchanges in energy, the sun, the wind, storms, migrations. It's about finding balance by moving energy or finding the resources to sustain it. So it made sense that I should tap into that by building instruments that could be part of the conversation. This is one of the things that I built. It's a wind powered turntable. So if you put it outside, it'll play according to the speed of the wind. So you might listen to your favorite Nina Simone record, and it might take 30 minutes, or it could be all over in 45 seconds, depending on the kind of day it is. This is the fire-powered turntable in the upper left and a balloon-powered record player. Both are played with a stylus glove that's in the lower right. It's a glove that has a record needle on each finger. So as you sort of wrangle the balloons with one arm, you can play the surface of the record with the record needles on the other hand. I also designed water-driven turntables, and one that was earthquake powered that you would install, and then you just have to wait for an earthquake to be able to listen to it. I'd planned to record a piece of music just for people who might happen to come across the piece in the moments just after an earthquake. But after dealing with these sort of particular elements, I then began to think about how to interact with larger systems of energy, with beings that had some free will. So I created this piece at the Luggage Store Gallery in San Francisco. They allowed me to remove the windows and then of the gallery and replace them with this handmade habitat for the Market Street pigeons. This was on the second floor, and the birds were free to come and go as they chose. And the ledges inside the structure were weight sensitive. So when the birds would land on them, they would trigger the turntables and sound elements within the gallery. So it took about 2 weeks for a bird to finally cross the threshold. And during that time, when the piece was empty, people they offered a lot of advice about what I needed to change. But in the end, it turned out we just needed to be patient. The birds figured it out. And we weren't really entitled to a rapid shift in their behavior. But once this bird that you see in the picture was the very first one that entered. Once they entered, then all their friends started to show up too. And every day around 1 o'clock, the piece would come to life. So I remember one day standing in the street on Market Street and watching a pigeon fly the length of Market Street and then turn and fly directly into my piece. And I was like, I've made it into this bird's consciousness. It just felt so nice to have that connection. And then after a month, we removed the work, and then the windows were put back up. And for 2 weeks after that, the pigeons still returned every day around 1 o'clock, expecting the place to be there. So it turns out we'd made this impression into the fabric of the natural world. And it took time. It took 2 weeks, the same as it took for them to arrive, for that impression to dissipate and then the bird behavior to return to normal. And then from the pigeons, I went to the sea. I was invited to build a piece at the Headland Center for the Arts. So I built this ocean edge device, and it was meant to interact with the ocean. I built it in 3 weeks, just improvised the whole thing based on what I learned in the bathtub as a kid. And built this, and we put it into the ocean and then let the waves power the thing. There's a big water wheel that would spin and power a pump that would pump air into a melodica and power a cam that would drive an accordion. And also there's some salad bowls there that would spin in the wind and play an old 78 player, so I could play records in the water. This was really my first attempt at making a work where the forces were larger than my ability, my individual ability to manage them. And the thing that I hadn't anticipated was that the world made space for my idea. The audience members who jumped in to steady the work, the people who volunteered to help transport the instrument, those who appeared out of the blue to help make it possible. It's the first piece that was bigger than me. And the story within the work helped move people to participate and bring the piece to life. And I was really grateful for that. I think it was a good lesson that you don't always have to be able to carry the work by yourself in order for it to live. And while all this was happening concurrently, the birds are happening and art is happening. I met this bird who we'll call Patch, as a red-tailed hawk in the middle of San Francisco, struggling to survive, hungry, and hanging out at this park near where I lived. And so I followed this bird around for a week on my way, to work and back. I'd find Patch and I'd go to photograph her. And one day she just turned and looked at me. This is about a week later. She turned and looked at me, and then she took off and dove straight at me. And I put my camera down because she was this is like a sequence of pictures to illustrate the moment, and then I'll show you photos from the real moment. So I put my camera down because I thought I'd messed up and she was flying right at me, but she landed right next to me on the ground about 4 feet away. And I could always tell it was her because if you look on her right wing, you can see there's a primary feather that's missing. And so for the first few months, I could identify her by that broken feather. But once it grew in, by that point, I knew her like a friend. I knew her morphology. I knew her characteristics, her attitude, her personality. I could tell the difference between red-tailed hawks, and I wouldn't have thought that you could do that, but it is really a matter of familiarity. So she lands on the ground right next to me, about 4 feet away. I'm frozen at this point, and she just leans over and picks up and eats a caterpillar. And then she turned around and sat there with me, and we just sat together on the ground in this park for about a minute before somebody walked up and she flew away. And I was completely hooked after that. I was like, I went back to that park maybe 3 or 4 times a week for 7 months. And I spent time looking for the bird. Sometimes she'd be there, sometimes she wouldn't. Other times, like, strange things would happen to make me realize that she had kind of accepted me as not a threat and a part of her landscape, and she didn't seem fearful at all. She'd pluck gophers out of the field right next to me, and this is a pocket gopher that she has in her right foot. She'd allow me to approach while she was eating, so I could see these really incredible scenes of her predation. And this is the park that she made her living at. It's 4 square blocks in San Francisco, and the street lights around this park, if you're sitting on them, it's basically a gopher buffet, like in layers, so she could see all of the green spaces, all the gopher burrows, and keep track of everything in the park. She also liked to sit on a cross that was near the park, so she would sit up here and keep an eye on things. This is a pretty affluent neighborhood, and people who live there, at least at the time, didn't really realize the incredible natural wonders that were at their doorsteps, even in the middle of a metropolis like San Francisco. And I didn't have a stroller, I didn't have a partner, I didn't have a dog, I wasn't having a picnic, and I was really still. And I think their limited imaginations conjured up the worst. They didn't really have room for the possibility that somebody who looks like me could be there for something in nature, because I think that would imply that someone like me might know something about the place that they don't, and it's a place that they lay claim to. So their default response was fear, and I had the cops called on me multiple times for bird watching in that space. So I ended up putting these advisories up all over the park that said, "Have you seen this man? He's a Black man and also a bird photographer. While this combination may be rare, rest assured it is generally not considered dangerous." And I said a whole bunch of other stuff in it, but I said, don't call the cops unless you see me getting accosted by somebody else. Save your fear for something that counts. And I put these up all over the park, and it sort of changed the tenor of the relationship of the neighborhood to me. And eventually things sort of settled down and I became more of a local personality rather than a threat. But once Patch left, during migration and then returned the next year, the same sort of tensions had returned. It only took about 6 months for people to get scared again. But I'll just show you a few more images of her and then we'll move on. Just a really privileged encounter with a bird making their way in the city. Here you can see she's beginning to molt, losing her feathers symmetrically. And you can see her deck feathers coming in there, or that signature red tail. And then here she is the next spring, early summer, when she came back as an adult bird. Just a gorgeous bird. And at first I wondered if it was her, and then I walked up to her like 10 feet away, and I was like, okay, it's you. She didn't seem to have any trouble with me at all, and I was able to read the band number and identify her. And because I'd taken so many pictures of her, I'd already reported her band to the bird banding laboratory, and that meant that I had a connection with the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory, who banded her. And so I met one of my dear friends and birding mentors, Siobhan Ruck, as a result of meeting her at a hawk talk where I think she released a Cooper's hawk, and she invited me to visit the GGRO banding program. And so I went from following hawks for over a year to holding them and having a chance to participate in a research program that was dedicated to their conservation. So it was a really wonderful, wonderful journey that Patch took me on. Turns out she lived for about 5 years. She moved up to a valley near Clear Lake, probably had a few generations of kids, and then her leg was found in a creek 5 years later, which is a good lifespan for a wild bird of prey. So the GGRO has an incredible ethic, and the learning environment there is such that the birds are prioritized. They are the priority. So if you're trying to learn to be a bander, even if someone's told you something 4 times, if you ask a question, like, people will stop what they're doing and they'll help you because they realize that it's the well-being of the birds that's the most important thing. So as a learning environment, it was one of the most sort of generative and like welcoming places to learn a new skill and to enter into this conversation with wild spaces and birds. Yeah, I added the tie to the bird. I couldn't resist. So it really was one of the greatest privileges of my life to be in close contact with wild birds of prey in this effort to learn more about them and be able to support their populations. Now back to my art practice. I was invited by the San Francisco Arts Commission to create a work for a play area in Terminal 2 in San Francisco. And I ended up making this handmade wooden mural featuring images of birds that I'd taken over the previous 6 years. I hand cut all of the inlay pieces, the wooden inlay pieces by hand, and created this 26-foot long image of the headlands, the bridge, and the city. And the central sparrow and benches are also xylophones. They're tuned to the golden crown sparrow song, so you can replicate the melody of their call or just play whatever you like. This was installed in Terminal 2 in 2011. Coming up to the present day, we're about to finish the installation of this new work in just a few months. This is also commissioned by the San Francisco Arts Commission, this time in partnership with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. It's meant to be a vessel for the vision and the voices of the tribe. The main visual component is this large steel eagle in the 30-foot wide plaza with its wings wrapped around the 3 benches. And given the history of this particular site, it's also a protective gesture that's meant to extend to the land itself, because at this location, which is near the Sonola Water Temple, north of San Jose, up at the top of Niles Canyon, when they were excavating the land for the building, they found remains and artifacts, ancestors of the Muwekma Ohlone. So the tribe was brought in and worked with UC Berkeley to manage the cultural reclamation and the archaeological process, and the relocation of some of those below ground and their artifacts. So it's both an honor and a really deep responsibility that I feel to create a work that sits on this sacred ground and that addresses what the earth holds and what it means to the tribe, both today and into the future. This is an image of the work as it was being fabricated. In the wings and tail, representing the people's vision, there's glass panels that have been printed with transparent images that are gathered from the watershed. And then to represent the voices of community, both human and greater than human, there's a sound installation in the garden that incorporates Chochenyo phrases in code form. translating them into songs and calls of the natural world. Churcheño is the language of the Mork Maloney people. I'm really grateful to the Mork Maloney leaders who've been involved in this process for supporting the work and for inviting me to collaborate with the community. So just to keep things, there's a lot of aspects to this work, but to keep things in line with our theme, I'll focus on the sound installation. It's one of the more unique ways that birds have found their way into the work. Language is really critical to a culture. It really shapes the way we think and how we see the world. So I've created a Churcheño-based sound work that plays from the speakers in the garden. The content is phrases, Churcheño phrases that have been sung to the tune of local bird and animal calls that were slowed way down. So when they're sped up again, those phrases are heard in the garden in conversation with the sounds and the songs that are already present. The technique is inspired by the work of a UK artist named Marcus Coates. So basically, I'll record their voices mimicking the song of a white-crowned sparrow that's been slowed down. And then when we speed those phrases up, they've been mimicking it, saying Churcheño phrases. When we speed their voices up, it sounds just like a white-crowned sparrow, although just a little bit different because it was spoken by a person in Churcheño. I'm going to jump ahead of this video for a second. And so each voice is in the landscape in places where you might actually be able to hear those birds, were they actually there. And this is a top-down view of the interpretive center and where the speakers and the eagle and everything are going to be. So one of the dreams that I have about this piece is that sometimes birds will learn to mimic slight variations in their songs that they might learn from their environment. And so it might be possible that a sparrow foraging at the Alameda Creek Watershed Center might hear the a particular phrasing of a song and pick up that phrasing. And then the reason it's going to sound different to them is because it was sung in Churcheño by a specific person, and that bird could fly off singing that phrase in other landscapes to other birds on their travels. And I just love the idea of language permeating the natural world in that way. So it's a little dream of mine, maybe a behind the scenes. It may happen, it may not happen, but the idea that a bird could shift or learn a new variation of its song from one of the members of the tribe, I think is a lovely one. It should be available for the public to see sometime this summer if the center opens on schedule. It's only a few miles away from one of the largest golden eagle breeding areas in the country, I think, which is in the region near Altamont Pass, which is one of the reasons that the eagle is in the work. But the main reason is that the presence of the eagle in the creation story that the tribe shared with me, and my desire to sort of include the presence of this protective figure at this particular location. So here's a real quick video showing some of the installation work. We've got part of it done, and we're going to finish it up in the next few months. And I'll just cover one last piece that just opened at the California Academy of Sciences. This is Leo na Kesho. It means today and tomorrow in Kiswahili. It's an installation in their Tushur African Hall. It's a storefront that's inspired by the ones in Kariakoo, and it's a district in Dar es Salaam, in the city where I grew up in Tanzania. It's really a collection of references to the types of stores that are found in that area, and it's heavily informed by my memories and associations of growing up in Tanzania. It's a response to the use of dioramas as teaching tools and to their pretty problematic history of extraction as a means to educate or entertain audiences at a distance. The work is really meant to communicate that people from Dar es Salaam, not just Africans in general, but more specifically those in the Kariakoo district, they're living, they're listening, they're going about their daily modern lives. And it's really meant to uproot visitors from a narrowly framed and weirdly nostalgic stroll through African Hall, and really have them contend with the presence of those on the continent in a different way. As a naturalist and as a bird watcher, I wanted to include house crows in this as another indicator of human presence and movement. They weren't really common when I was a kid, but now they're everywhere. And they've displaced the pied crows that used to be in the area. So highlighting a so-called invasive species really connects us to the natural world while highlighting our impact on the world around us through our migrations, our movements, and our misjudgments. I think they were originally brought to Zanzibar as a way to like clean up junk. I worked with Taylor Hawkinson, a friend of mine and a artist and engineer, and he modeled the crows in 3D modeled the crows and then CNC cut them out of foam and then sent those to Ian Hart at the Cal Academy, who made these really incredible house crows for the work. They have such like lovely detail and personality, and they feel like they're a crew. They've been together for years, like running around Dar es Salaam and making a living. So it's really nice to have these crows in the work. I have one more large scale project about volcanoes that I will gladly share with anyone at another time, but I want to at least save the last 10 minutes here for a conversation and questions. And if you are really eager to hear about this volcano project in Iceland, I can return to that as well. So I'm gonna stop sharing now so that we can just have a chat.
Well, thank you so much, Walter. That was amazing on so many different levels, and I'm really moved by everything that you shared. Everything that you've been inspired by and your journey, and the current work that you're installing just looks incredible. And I know that a lot of people here hopefully will be going out to see those installations once they're up. So thank you again so much. That was really amazing. And so, yeah, I do want to entertain questions, so go ahead and have people enter things in the chat. I know that there were some great comments here, someone realizing that that bird installation at the airport was you and how they love going there every time they go to that airport. Someone else also mentioned that first phono harp you showed us, it even kind of looks like it's in the shape of a wing too, even though I'm sure that's inadvertent, but it's pretty cool to see how your art and your inspiration from birds have kind of melded together as well. And then, yeah, someone else said that they're getting goosebumps hearing about all the incredible layers and meanings of the project that you're putting up at the Alameda Creek Watershed Interpretive Center. Yeah, so one question that we have here in the chat is, can we find videos of your instruments and performances online?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of my work is available on my website, my last name, kitundu.com. And there's a lot of material there to look through and sift through. And you can also get in touch with me via that website. So if there's something in particular you're curious about, feel free to send me a note and we can go from there.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you. And I will be sure to send that link out to everybody as well at the end after the event. And yeah, someone also just wanted to clarify if your wall art with the xylophones is at SFO. And yes, you said it was at Terminal 2, yes?
That's right, Terminal 2.
Yes, yeah, so definitely check it out.
It used to be gate like 52, but I think they've renumbered everything since then. It's been 12 years. So.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to, anytime someone is flying out of SFO, definitely check that out. Look for that installation. It should be really cool. Yeah, a lot of just, compliments on your presentation. And so, you've mentioned that, well, I want to give you the invitation to talk a little bit about your volcano work and your Iceland work. So do you want to go ahead and do that while we wait for more questions and comments to come in?
Sure. I mean, and I also have a few minutes, so in case we need to wait a bit for those to roll in.
Sure.
Let me answer this one question I think that just came through.
Yeah.
Do I feel an attachment to a certain geographic location, a sense of place? Or do I find it hard to build those connections after living in so many places, and does it inform my work? I do feel that. I didn't for a long time. I was really envious of people that grew up in one place their whole lives and had this sense of like belonging, like people who like rep Brooklyn, or like they have a kind of like identity tied to place. And since I moved so many times, I never really had that. until living in the Bay Area and really sort of becoming who I am in that place. And I remember I had a residency in Singapore, and I was there for several months. And when I came back and I saw the coastline from the window of the airplane, I had this like deep, palpable feeling of being home, which I hadn't really had before. And so the Bay Area in California, the West Coast has meant that to me, and I think it's influenced my work in a lot of ways, so much so that I live in the Midwest now, and 90% of my work happens in the Bay Area still. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I hope that you always feel at home here. You've touched a lot of people already, not just through this presentation, but also obviously through the artwork you've already put up. So it's really lovely to hear that.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I can talk about the volcano piece quickly if people are interested.
Yeah, please do.
This piece is a piece I'm currently researching and trying to make happen that includes science, art, community, storytelling, and I've really been dreaming about this for 15 years. I'm currently applying for funding and to try to complete the research and prototype development phase for this project called Geologic Soundcasting. It's a major sound installation, sculptural installation to be developed in one of Iceland's active volcanic regions. I plan to work with volcanologists to figure out the appropriate installation sites and collaborate with Icelandic artists to record stories and songs and then engrave those into enormous 10-foot diameter records, and then generate ceramic molds from those originals and install them in the landscape in anticipation of future volcanic eruptions. Those eruptions would inundate the sites with lava, and they would cast the recorded information into the cooling basalt when the lava hits the sites, so that months later we can excavate these giant boulders, and the stones will have the sound information imprinted on them, and then they can be played on enormous naturally powered turntables so that the public can see and hear the resulting stories, which are offered by Icelanders and then co-authored by the land itself. So the project really takes inspiration from the fact that the island is on the Mid-Atlantic ridge, and it's subject to the immense forces associated with the creation of new land. It's really shaped by these calamitous events, and I think Iceland's residents have always had to contend with these forces, and they've tapped into this energy source to heat their homes and power their cities. They've already written their stories in partnership with the land, and this piece is another way to interpret that and make that really sort of artistically clear. There's the National Power Company that has arts funding program, which is really cool, and it might be really nice to connect with them, and also develop local partnerships to help identify the sites for the work. There's a lot to figure out, and a lot to invent, and a lot to sort out, and a lot of people to talk to, and a lot of hurdles to overcome, technical and otherwise. But that's a really exciting part of this project, and I feel like it's actually possible for me to do now. I need to identify software and processing that's needed to translate the recorded audio information from the artists into information that the CNC routers and 3D printers can use to physically encode the sonic information for this work. We need to figure out the best materials for the ceramic molds. I need to invent the systems which can recover the sounds and play the stones, and then develop sustainable ways to play the works by tapping into geothermal and other sources. So I'm really excited about this project because if I work it out in Iceland, it's going to shape future work that I can do in north central Tanzania, where my father was born, and in Hawaii and in other places, volcanically active regions, where indigenous voices can be centered and celebrated in conversation with the geologic forces underfoot. So the piece is really in its early stages. I've been thinking about it for 15 years, but now it's in its early stages, and isn't specifically about birds, but it's full of the lessons that birds have taught me. And I think it just goes to show you where a bird obsession can eventually take you. So that's that work.
Wow, that sounds absolutely incredible. I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to hearing more about that as it develops and comes to fruition. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we did have another question here. If you have any installations in Chicago?
I don't at the moment. Um, I I may have something going on this summer, but I've been away, and so the Chicago art scene moves on. And when I return this summer back to Chicago, I'll be back in conversation with the arts community there, and I'm hoping things will develop. But I do have a few things that are cooking for the Bay Area, and I might have some more things to announce in the coming months, but we'll see.
Well, that is so exciting. Like everything just sounds really amazing, and I can't wait to see them all and hear about how their stories behind them, you know. So thank you so much. And it is just about 7 p.m. right now, so I do want to thank everybody for joining us. We can stay on a bit longer if anyone has any last questions, but if not, you can always get in contact with me or through Walter's website, which I will send after if you have anything else that you want to ask or share. So first of all, again, thank you so much, Walter. That was absolutely incredible. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. I hope that you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Walter, are there any last things that you want to share with everyone before we sign off this evening?
No, I'm just really grateful to be able to share this with you, and to be in a position to be able to do this work. So it's not lost on me that I have a good job. I feel very fortunate that I can weave birds and kayaking and history and stories into the work I do on a day-to-day basis. And I hope that all of you have an opportunity in some way, shape, or form to incorporate the things that you love into the things that you do, um, or be able to center them in such a way that it feeds you and allows you to carry on.
Absolutely. And, I think your work extends well beyond the people who love birds, right? And hopefully will inspire more people to pay attention to them and care for them and want to conserve them as well. So, yeah,
I see them
absolutely.
as great teachers. They've taught me a lot. And that could be another conversation in and of itself.